At long last, the day has come. Today we finally uncover the horrifying truth behind the cross outbreak. In this week's shocking episode, we turn back the clock before the screaming, before the madness, and before the infected turn the planet into their personal playground of pain and perversion. We're heading to Great Britain, ground zero of the apocalypse. There we meet Patient Zero, the man who started it all. And along the way, we'll be reunited with the four protagonists of The Fatal Englishman, long before their desperate gambit to save what remained of humanity. But these early days are strange. The Crossed don't quite behave like we've come to expect. There's something different here. And as you'll soon discover, the truth behind it all is far more disturbing than anyone ever imagined. Hey guys, I'm your host, Juan, and today we'll be going over Crossed, the Thin Red Line, aka issues 50 through 56 of the Badlands anthology series. Today's story was written by Garth Ennis, and it features art done by Christian Zanier. But before we get into it, make sure you're subscribed to the channel in order to stay in the loop with all the latest videos. Alrighty then, let's jump right in. Our story opens on a barefoot man running for his life under the pitch-dark sky. The problem is, he doesn't exactly know what he's running from. The man keeps getting these flashes of himself doing something to his beloved family, but he can't focus on it or precisely recall what happened. But he just feels awful, and he's overwhelmed with a guilt he can't quite name. It feels like there's this blackness deep inside him, swelling up and slowly devouring him entirely. The man's head rings with the sound of some terrible voice screaming out at him. He even starts seeing things that aren't there, such as a phantom fighter jet hurtling toward him, prompting the man to lose his footing, tumble down the hill, and collapse in front of a police car. The two officers inside get out, and the last thing we see is them checking on the man to see if he's alright. And from there we cut to the very next day. It's the summer of 2008, and we see then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Gordon Brown, meet and greet voters. Also present and keeping watch on the Prime Minister is his security detail, four familiar faces: Paddy, Jock, Taff, and Harry. The Prime Minister gets into his car, and his aide starts telling him the news, which includes another shooting in the United States. And the PM is about to blurt out his unfiltered reaction to this information until Harry pops his head in and informs the man that he's still got a live mic on him from an earlier interview he gave. So Harry pretty much prevented a hot mic situation, and the Prime Minister starts yelling at his aide for not doing his job and looking out for that type of thing. The aide's name is Alistair, by the way, and he's kind of a wormy, conniving little guy. Regardless, as he's getting yelled at by his boss, he keeps shooting out dirty looks at Harry. And this is followed up later on when the sniveling aide confronts Harry, who is drinking tea off the clock. Alistair basically tells him to back off and stay off his turf, but Harry is unfazed by this posturing. He coolly looks Alistair up and down, and he tells him that he's aware that he tried to join ex-PM Tony Blair's team before settling with Brown, and that he might now very well be trying to sabotage his current boss. Alistair angrily reacts to this accusation, and he starts threatening Harry, promising the Englishman that he has a lot of power and he can fuck them over whenever he feels like it. He then asks Harry why he even cares, considering he didn't even vote for Gordon Brown anyway. Harry responds that his politics is a private matter, and that he has a job to do, and he actually cares about doing what's right and what's fair. Simple as that. Alistair just leaves in a huff, though, right as Paddy, Jock, and Taff walk into the establishment. A few hours later, we see the Prime Minister, his aide, and the security B team driving around as news is delivered to them about an ongoing situation developing. They are getting incredibly strange and disturbing reports out of a town about 30 miles away about an incoherent man who attacked two officers who found him on a road. But things only got worse from there. You see, when they subdued him and brought him to the police station, they called in the paramedics. But when they actually got there, all they found was the man wandering around the station, with one officer dead, one unconscious, and all the rest missing. But what's even more disconcerting than that is that upon further investigation, it was quickly discovered that everyone in the entire town was missing. All the residents completely disappeared without a trace. Unfortunately, that's not where the madness ends. Because the ambulance carrying the man the police found, it wound up crashing, and the two paramedics inside were found dead, seemingly having murdered each other. So people in the know put two and two together, and they concluded that the man must be spreading some kind of contagious infection, and so they hurried him to a government quarantine facility. The Prime Minister is at a loss for words, but Alistair the aide asks him if he wants to go to the quarantine facility, because it actually doubles as an underground command center as well. The security guys butt in and call this idea stupid, and ask why on earth they would bring the PM directly to the one place where there is a mysterious, unidentified infected guy. The aide gets defensive, and he stammers that the head doctor wants to speak with the Prime Minister, and they confirm to him over the phone that there is absolutely no risk and that it's perfectly safe. The Prime Minister thinks for a moment, and then he decides to go on to the facility. When they get there, the PM gets out of the car, and he meets the senior medical officer in charge, a woman named Dr. Chopra. But they only talk for about literally 2 seconds before there's a loud crash, and the disturbed man at the center of all the mysterious events, well, he darts straight through the glass door, directly toward the head of government. And this prompts the big security agent to right hook the madman, knocking him out cold and splattering his blood all over the place. But just when you think the tone can't get any more serious, it absolutely doesn't. As we transition back to our four protagonists, in what's the most bizarre ending to an issue I've ever seen. The four are hanging out at a bar, drinking and leering at the bartender, who has massive assets. Bro, what the fuck is that? Holy fucking shit, dude. What the fuck? Anyway, about an hour later, we pick back up with the gang arriving at the government facility after having received an emergency distress call. They meet Dr. Chopra and demand to know what happened and if the Prime Minister is safe. She assures them that he's okay, but the situation is dire. The doctor tells the four what we already know. They had captured the individual they thought responsible for the outbreak, and he just so happened to escape right as the PM was arriving. Harry asks her why the Prime Minister was even here in the first place, and she responds that she believes it was his aide who made the decision. But all that is besides the point, because as she informs the men, something happened to the alternative security team after they came into contact with the patient. They were just nauseous at first, but when being examined by the lab attendants, they suddenly snapped and began violently attacking them. For that reason, they sealed off the examination room as quickly as possible, trapping the men inside. Dr. Chopra tells our heroes to brace themselves as she opens the viewing room, and we see the former security team writhing and hollering like a pack of wild animals. They are surrounded by all manners of defilement. Mutilated bodies, intestines strewn across the floor, and walls painted in blood. Harry, Jock, Taff, and Patty stare wide-eyed in shock. It's a real-life portrait of hell on earth. The doctor holds herself, and she chokes out that this is what happens to everyone who interacts with the patient zero. That is, everyone except patient zero himself. What's even more frightening, though, is that they actually got blood samples from the men before they turned, but they are unable to find anything in them, and a disease with no identifiable biological markers is impossible to know or to understand. By all outward appearances, Harry maintains his composure through this, and he asks to be taken to the Prime Minister immediately. And so they go to see Gordon Brown, and he's really upset that men lost their humanity protecting him. Harry tersely reminds him that it was their job, and he declares that their number one priority right now is getting the PM away from this location and back to London. He then turns to Dr. Chopra and asks her how widespread this infection likely is at this point. The doctor looks down and says that there's really no way of knowing. Obviously, it spreads incredibly quickly, but they don't even know where, when, and how patient Zero was infected, nor who he had contact with in the time before he was quarantined. The Prime Minister digests this information for a moment before he directs his attention back to Harry, and he asks the Englishman what he thinks they should do next. And it is this inquiry which prompts Alistair, the astonishing worm boy, to interject himself into the conversation. The aide desperately begs his boss to have no further decisions or discussions in the presence of Harry. But the Prime Minister just brushes off this insecure outburst, and he lets Harry speak. The soldier responds that he thinks they should declare a state of emergency, call in a helicopter to airlift the PM out of there, and send for a full squadron to protect the man in the meantime. The Prime Minister doesn't want to incite a nationwide panic, though, so he says no to the first part, but he ultimately gives the go-ahead for the rest. And so in the meantime, Harry decides to visit the patient Zero, in the hopes of getting some information out of him. So Harry walks into the holding cell and meets the man who started it all. Unfortunately, the patient has more questions than answers for them. He has no idea where he came from or what he's even done. He's really just kind of an average bloke. He offers to give them samples and help them in any way he can because he knows he'll need the doctor's help in order to make sense of what's happened to him. Dr. Chopra steps up to the glass and asks the patient if there's anything he hasn't told them for any reason at all. The man hesitates, and he answers the question with a question. He asks Harry what his name is. Harry tells him, and then the soldier subtly flinches as the man replies that he knows that Harry's killed before because he can smell their screams on him. The doctor asks what that means, but patient Zero shuts down and stops responding. So after that dead end, Harry goes back upstairs and he corners Alistair. He pointedly asks the aide if he confirmed over the phone himself that the patient was properly secured before coming here. The Weasley man starts shifting and stuttering, but Harry cuts him off. He reveals that Dr. Chopra said that she had only spoken to an intermediary to report the situation, and the next thing she knew, she got notification that the Prime Minister was on his way. And, if actually given the chance to do so, she would have strenuously advised against him coming to the facility. So, Harry concludes that Alistair's incompetence is now directly responsible for the deaths of several people, and it has further jeopardized the life of Gordon Brown. Alistair erupts at this accusation, and he starts taunting Harry for caring so much about his oh-so-precious Prime Minister, who he shouts is an indecisive dreck he's forced to put up with on a daily basis. But the confrontation is cut off there because all of a sudden Tav springs into the room, informing Harry that Patty needs to speak to him. You see, Patty just got off the phone, and to put it bluntly, the Prime Minister's helicopter isn't coming anymore. It just got shot out of the sky by a rogue Royal Air Force aircraft, and now all flights are grounded until they figure out what's going on. Harry takes a breath and remains calm, and he says that, okay, now we have no choice but to seal the Prime Minister in this facility. So our protagonists hurry over to tell their boss the change in plans. However, when they get there, it's actually everyone else in the room who has news for them. They've finally located the missing townspeople, but it wasn't the government who found them. No, it was the news media, who are now broadcasting it live across the entire country. It appears that the missing town residents are mechanically marching, like robots, in a caravan with blank expressions on their faces. Well, that is at least until the camera zooms in a little, and we see that every now and then, some of the people randomly murder one of their own. But the vast majority of them keep walking unwaveringly. The feed cuts off for a moment, and then it reconnects, showing the live footage from a new angle, and it turns everyone in the room's blood cold. The townspeople are deliberately walking themselves off a cliff en masse, all to their collective deaths. After that disturbing revelation, we do a hard cut over to a Royal Air Force base, where we meet two members of the number 617 squadron. The guy on the left is a navigator named Tom, and the woman on the right is a pilot named Jackie. Oh, and they were obviously modeled after actors Liam Neeson and Megan Fox. Anyway, right now the two are discussing the historic World War II roots of their air unit, and wondering that if the moment ever came, would they be able to live up to its proud legacy? It's somber food for thought, but at the moment, Jackie is also pretty upset because her superior has actually just grounded her due to her impulsive behavior. So she stands outside the hangar to let off some steam, and there Tom comforts her, teasing that, to be fair, she does kind of tend to throw safety to the wind and go off the books when she's flying. But their conversation is ultimately cut short. A mutual friend runs up to them, frantic. He asks if they have heard the news that some of their fellow pilots have just gone AWOL and started shooting random planes out of the sky. That would already be enough to process by itself, but then the group looks into the sky, and they see an erratic fighter jet rapidly descending towards them. They all take cover as best they can as the plane kamikazes into a massive, fiery explosion. The sound is deafening, and for a moment, Tom and Jackie aren't even sure that they're still alive. Their friend, who just got impaled through the heart, certainly isn't. Nevertheless, they regain their senses, just in time to avoid a semi-truck that plows through the base's chain-link fence. And, pouring through the gap, is an army of blood-stained figures. Meanwhile, at the command center, distraught calls are being made back and forth as the Prime Minister desperately tries to figure out what the hell is going on. He eventually gets word about the attack on the airbase, and he asks out loud if this is some kind of coordinated attack. He wonders if terrorists have intentionally released some kind of biological agent in the country in order to cripple the nation. Dr. Chopra responds that she thinks that's rather unlikely. The infection is just too powerful and too strange. There are already plenty of diseases one could release that would simply make everyone sick and die, but this unknown infection instead renders the population into homicidal and suicidal maniacs. And the fact is that it spreads way too quickly and easily for it not to rebound against whoever would have released it. Essentially, it's just too uncontrollable to be a weapon. The real question, then, is why and how did some random air pilots get infected? The only logical answer must be that they have had some kind of direct or indirect contact with patient zero at some point. And Harry reads this as a cue, and he decides to talk to the patient one more time to see if he can get anything useful out of him. As he stands up to leave, Alistair pipes up in a snarky voice, and he jabs that they may as well share some tea together while they're at it, but Harry just laughs off this weird aggression. In any case, he goes downstairs and peers through the glass at the patient zero. Harry breaks the silence and asks what the man meant when he said that he could smell the screams of the people he's killed. The man shakes his head and he says that he can taste murder and hear blood, but he's at a total loss to explain it any further than that. Harry confirms that, yes, he was right. He has killed people before, specifically in the Middle East when he was in the Special Forces. But then the patient cuts Harry off. The man stutters that he might have hurt someone he cares about. He can feel them. Harry asks if he's talking about a wife, a girlfriend, children, but patient zero says he doesn't know. Well, that's not exactly true, per se. He can feel their names on the tip of his tongue, and there is something there, a hazy memory that he's almost repressing from himself. The man knows that if he thinks about it too hard, he knows that he'll start screaming, and something will break inside him, and he won't be able to come back. The patient is fighting for his sanity here. Every time he closes his eyes, he sees these flashes of real-life historical atrocities in detail impossible for him to know firsthand. The killing fields in Cambodia, the Bosnian War genocide, he sees it all. But the scariest part of it is that there's also this smiling voice in the back of his head, and he's terrified that it's about to start laughing. And when it does, there'll be nothing he can do to stop it. The patient abruptly drops this train of thought, and he turns to face Harry. He then asks the soldier if he believes in God. No, says Harry. He only believes in the part of man that uses what he calls God to justify and excuse unspeakable acts of evil and cruelty. And, says Harry, he's killed many such men before. From there, we cut back to the Air Force Base, which has descended into utter chaos as an inferno rages out of control behind a mob of people smothering each other. Jackie and Tom peek out at this from the sidelines, trying to keep a low profile. But unfortunately, one of the intruders finds them, and it's a woman flinging around a dead infant, repeating over and over again that she killed her own baby, and she doesn't know why. But then, a heavily armed vehicle just runs her over out of nowhere. A man with a mustache asks if Tom and Jackie are aircrew, and when they say yes, he says excellent, because that's what he was ordered to find. And so they get on board and make their getaway, mowing down as many hostiles as they can as they make their great escape away from the base. Back at the government facility, Harry walks up to the balled-up Dr. Chopra, startling her. He asks if she's alright, but she says no, and that she feels genuinely scared now for the first time. The scientists were finally able to isolate the pathogen in the infected blood samples, and the virus is completely unlike anything ever seen in the history of virology. The evidence suggests to the doctor that the virus had needed some time to mature, but now it has reached its full development. It is at this point that prior symptoms, such as suicidal ideation, are likely to fade away, leaving only pure rage in the psychosomatic sense. But that's not all. Dr. Chopra tells Harry that the infected are also now displaying physical alterations as well. Harry asks what she means by this, but she tells him to just go see for himself. And so our man visits the holding cell containing the infected security team, and what he sees genuinely startles him. And so the issue ends with us seeing that the infected men have, for the first time, developed grotesque, blistering rashes across their faces in the shape of a cross. Oh, hi. I didn't see you there. While I have you, I might as well let you know about my YouTube membership program. You see, for just $1.99 a month, you can support the channel and get access to a special loyalty badge next to your name, videos a bit early, and a set of exclusive community emojis. I quite like the smiling cross guy one, personally. Just a little goes a long way in helping create more videos, so I thank you for the consideration. But enough with that, let's get back to the video. And we're back, and we pick up with the belated arrival of the Minister's Protection Squadron, who have brought along with them key government personnel to assist the PM. Harry and Patty greet the Major in charge outside, a man clearly familiar and friendly with them. Also, he's literally Dolph Lundgren. Anyway, inside the bunker, things are pretty busy. The Prime Minister's staff is shouting out information as soon as they get it, kind of like Wall Street. In any event, one of them tells the PM that England might not be alone in this. There are hazy reports of similar infections taking place in France, Pakistan, and other countries. But that doesn't really make sense. It would imply that there are multiple patient zeros simultaneously across the world. The minister asks Harry if he learned anything from speaking to England's patient zero, but Harry says all he got was vague generalities and abstractions. Alistair chimes in, saying they should just beat the information out of him then, to which Harry basically calls him a belligerent moron. And this prompts the worm to lose his temper, and he tells Harry that if he lacks the balls to do it, he and his thugs should be taken off the payroll. Harry moves fast, and in a blink of an eye, he looms over Alistair. And Patty advises the aide that it's in his best interest to fuck up out of there. But everyone's attention is soon redirected to one of the staffers, who's having a strong response to what he's hearing on the phone. They all stare at him as he takes a deep breath and announces to the room that Pakistan has just dropped a nuclear bomb on India. Time seems to stop, and everyone stands frozen in shock. From there, we briefly catch back up with Jackie and Tom. It appears that at some point, their escape vehicle from the airbase crashed, and now we see them trying to move on foot while supporting the heavily injured mustached man from earlier. He tells them to put him down, and he hands Tom a map, explaining that his orders were to deliver aircrew to a pickup point. But, bluntly, he's not going to make it. So he tells the pair that his orders are now theirs. It's now up to Tom and Jackie to use their radio when they get close enough to the location in order to send a signal so they can be picked up. The two are hesitant to abandon the mustached man, but he points a gun at them and tells them to go. And so they accept their mission and take off running. When we return to the bunker, we see that the Prime Minister is on the phone and very stressed. He's on call with Vladimir Putin, and the Russian is asking something big of him. Everyone watches in anticipation as Brown, with a defeated look on his face, puts the receiver down. He declares that 40 Kremlin bomber planes have just gone rogue, heading, apparently, for the United States' eastern seaboard. The North American Aerospace Defense Command is already aware, and they have sent out advance notice that should any Russian bombers penetrate American airspace, the very moment they do so, they'll be obliged to immediately mass fire intercontinental ballistic missiles in retaliation, in the off chance that the planes are, in fact, carrying nukes. And if it really does come to that, apparently, Putin has said that he'll have no choice but to respond in kind. But that's not really what Vladimir wants. He's instead begging the English Prime Minister to do whatever he can to take the Russian bombers down, because it's either that or the onset of a nuclear war. But time's ticking, and they only have about 9.5 hours until the planes reach America. The Prime Minister doesn't know what to do, but he's confused why people have only heard from NORAD and not the White House itself. So the PM resolves not to make any final decision until he gets the president on the phone and speaks to him. So he patches through to Washington via a special communication line, and he asks for the chief executive. But when the minister hits the speaker button, all anyone can hear is incoherent vulgarities and nefarious laughter. And it's clear that the White House has been lost. So the PM quietly hangs up, and he begins talking himself into a plan to intercept the Russian planes. However, one of the staff members says it's unlikely that they even can at this point. You see, none of the air bases close enough to realistically complete this job are responding. Sure, they could scramble together airmen from further into the country, but there's not going to be enough fuel for them to complete the task and return back home. But, says the staffer, there is actually one option still left on the table. He explains that when the Prime Minister initiated the emergency protocols, it automatically gave the go-ahead to start a number of secret procedures. Apparently, there are 6 hidden bunkers scattered across England, each containing a single nuclear aircraft. But the staffer continues, reporting that they have only heard from 2 of the bunkers, with neither of them having the emergency flight crew that was supposed to be rushed to them when the order was given. That said, the bunker that is closest to them has actually intercepted transmissions from 2 Royal Air Force crew members who are lost somewhere on the outside. So if they're really going to go through with this, the plan would have to be something like this. First, someone would need to pick up the 2 aircrew, and then the aircrew needs to intercept the Russian bombers somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, and then they would need to detonate an atomic bomb, destroying them all in one fell swoop. So if they're going to go through with it, there's one question that remains. Who is going to go find and deliver the aircrew? Without missing a beat, the Prime Minister turns to Harry and asks if he and his men could do the job, as there is nobody else who has both the knowledge of the full stakes as well as the skills to actually see it done. Harry protests, asserting that their assigned job is to secure and protect the Prime Minister, whatever means necessary. But the PM cuts him off. He tells Harry that he could make it in order, but the truth is, there's just no one he trusts more than the Englishman. So Harry has no choice but to go through with it. But before he departs, he makes the rounds one last time to make sure everything's in order. He first speaks to Dr. Chopra, who is observing the sleeping patient Zero. The doctor looks incredibly gloomy. She says that this virus really could be the end of everything. No antivirus would ever be able to keep up with its mutations and behavior. She likens it to something from another existence entirely. The doctor wonders if it was something in our DNA from the beginning, and something that manifested in a few random individuals the moment it was meant to. Or, as she puts it, rather somberly, it seems that their lives have all coincided with the wrong moment in human destiny. Harry boxes this thought up for now and proceeds outside in order to touch base with his major buddy. He tells the major to remain vigilant, but their conversation is interrupted by Alistair, who appears in a huff, demanding to know who he's going to be working with. Harry stifles his laughter and nods at the major. The aide then lectures the man, saying that he's the Prime Minister's middleman and that all information, commands, and expectations travel through him. Harry and the major exchange knowing glances before Harry joins Jock, Taff, and Patty, and they load up in their vehicle and depart the government facility. From there, we return to Tom and Jackie, who, are obviously the 2 aircrew the boys are looking for. They've been chased around for hours at this point, and they are now hiding behind a wall. Jackie has been communicating the signal into the radio the entire time to no end, and Tom tells her to give it up. But he spoke a moment too soon, because a mere few seconds later, they actually do hear a response back for the first time. It's Harry, and he asks if they know their location. The two respond in the negative, so Harry tells them to fire a shot in the air. Jackie and Tom hesitate, though, because if they do so, the infected in the area will also find them. But seeing as they have no alternative, they take the leap of faith and comply with the order. And, just as they feared, a bunch of maniacs emerge, charging at them full stop with sharp weapons. The pair are convinced it's over, but then they're blinded by bright lights, beckoning the arrival of our four heroes. And so the men scoop up the two aircrew and proceed with great haste toward the coordinates of the concealed bunker. Back at the command center, the Major and Alistair are already engaged in a heated argument. The Major is insisting on seeing the Prime Minister in order to confirm the peculiar orders the aide has just given him. You have to remember that the Major has a very tenuous grasp of what's even going on. In fact, we've been largely following one of the few groups in the world actually in the know. Pretty much everyone outside of the facility has at best partial and incomplete information and knowledge. In any case, Alistair shoots down the Major's request, arguing that they're effectively at war right now, and the PM is extremely busy. And when you're at war, you don't question the General's orders, you just follow them. The Major concedes, and confirms that the two men picked out for the assigned job will get it done. But what is this job exactly? Well, Alistair invoked the Prime Minister's authority, and on his behalf, he has unlocked Patient Zero's cell, and has sent two soldiers in hazmat suits in there to rough him up. And yeah, they proceed to start beating the shit out of the patient. They punch and kick the man with such a ferocity that he just about loses consciousness. But through the blow after blow, something connects in his mind, and he finally sees the entire truth. With full clarity, the patient sees himself, drowning his own children as they try in vain to overpower their father. And he sees himself afterwards butchering his devastated and terrified wife. And with that, Patient Zero gets a second wind, and he grasps onto a shard of glass and slices open one of the soldier's protection suits. He then jams his hand into the breach before being kicked back down. The soldier exclaims that the patient stuck his hands in his mouth. His partner asks if he's okay, but the soldier kneels down and stops responding. And then, in an eerie silence, he rigidly stands up and blankly stares down his comrade. Meanwhile, we find that Harry and the gang have successfully delivered Jackie and Tom to the hidden hangar. Technicians double-check everything as Harry confers with the aircrew. He makes sure they understand the plan. They are to fly ahead of the Russian bombers and then drop the A-bomb, letting the resulting EMP shockwave knock the planes directly out of the sky. All parties involved know it's going to be a long shot, and it's absolutely an insane plan, but the fate of the world might just depend on it. So everyone gets into position, with Jackie preparing for takeoff and Harry getting ready to clear a path for the plane. And with that, the hangar doors open and they're off. Unfortunately, there's a huge mob of the infected, who I think we're now safe to start calling the Crossed, obstructing the runway. And it's all hands on deck as they fire upon these creeps, straight up ripping their bodies apart from the intensity of the gunfire. Nevertheless, the plane manages to make a dramatic takeoff, launching into the air with yet a few stragglers still yet vying to get in, until the speed picks up and it's too great and it knocks them off. Jackie radios down to Harry, thanking him and his men for everything, and Harry replies that it sounds like drinks are on them, and he wishes his British brethren well as they soar away on a mission to a future unknown. As this is happening, back at the compound, Alistair has just introduced the Major to the infected security team. The Major is, of course, naturally at a complete loss for words. Well, at least at first. But this initial reaction is soon replaced by a raw astonishment and an angry bewilderment as to why the hell the aide put his men in a room with the person responsible for spreading the deadly infection. The Major pushes Alistair aside and begins marching to Patient Zero's containment room. Alistair, in a nasally voice, demands the Major to stop at once, but he's ignored. So then the aide physically throws his body over the door, and the Major tells him to move, or else he's about to have his teeth knocked down his throat. But it never comes to that, because in a fraction of a second, the door opens, and a powerful hand grips onto Alistair, dragging him into the room. The Major desperately pulls the door closed as quickly as he can manage, and he screams that they need to lock the door immediately. And on the inside, things are looking very dark indeed for Mr. Alistair. He has landed at the feet of Patient Zero, who stares at him with bloodshot eyes, and slowly stretching across the man's face is the infamous crossed rash. And we also see what the soldiers are up to. They are doing whatever you would call this. Alistair recoils and scrambles away in fear. He tells Patient Zero that he has power and influence and that he could help him, but the patient is not listening. He tells the aide that things are going to be perfect and they're going to be cleansing. And then he slowly pulls out 6 plastic knives, which were told but not shown that he jabs into his engorged genitals before moving on to raping Alistair to death. Don't worry though, we cut away from that nightmare to our Royal Air Service duo. The sun is rising now, and despite the plane being ancient, the flight has gone pretty smooth so far. They don't see anything at first, but then their field of vision is overtaken by a legion of enemy planes, who are, yes, being flown by the Crossed. Jackie flies out ahead of the fleet, and Tom prepares to drop the bomb, but then, out of nowhere, their plane starts sputtering. They think it's a fuel leak at first, or some kind of tank issue, but they don't have time to investigate because, tragically, the flight controls die, and the plane begins rapidly plummeting. The two briefly play with the idea of just ejecting right there, right now, but they realize it would be futile, as the bomb will automatically detonate once the plane hits a certain altitude. They sit in silence for a few seconds, and then Tom gently calls Jackie's name and asks her if she knows. Jackie smiles a little, and she responds that she's known since the moment they met. And with that, the sky bleaches to a searing white as the bomb explodes, and the shock wave reverberates through the air, destroying everything in sight. Then there is at last a quiet, followed only by a blistering wind. And while one story ends, another one rages on. This one, thousands of miles away and on the ground. It's Patty, Jock, Taff, and Harry, who are now pulling over the side of the road. Harry, who is listening to the radio, informs the rest that the government as they knew it has just officially collapsed, and it has now moved beyond the civil authority, and they're sealing the Prime Minister in the bunker at noon. There's no one in charge anymore, and everyone in the nation is now on their own. So now that it's all over, Harry confides with his brothers that he's disappointed with himself. He spent way too much time haggling with and listening to incompetence. If he had acted according to his guts, maybe things would have been different. But that's all ultimately besides the point. Jock and Taff have families out there, so Harry releases them, along with Patty, to go and secure the safety of their loved ones. Harry tells them that he plans to make one final courtesy report to the Prime Minister, before going off to find his own wife and kids, who are in their home in the country. He tells the three to keep in touch, but if for whatever reason the phones stop working, they should meet at a rendezvous location in 10 days' time. Patty looks at Harry and asks, what happens if it does all go to shit? And Harry firmly responds that, well, then an Englishman, an Irishman, a Scotsman, and a Welshman will meet together once again at the end of the world. So with the plan having been set, the crew drops Harry back off again to the government facility. Harry gets a gun and a car ready for when he departs, and he asks where the major is. A soldier responds that he's inside, but they have no idea of what's going on in there. Harry nods and walks into the command room and locates the Prime Minister. He tells the man that he saw the plane go off with the 2 air crews successfully, but he has no way of knowing if it worked out or not in the end. But if it did, the world undoubtedly owes them a huge debt. The PM agrees, and he tells Harry that there's something he needs to talk to him about before he leaves for good. He explains that while the government has essentially liquidated, senior officials and their families are currently being moved to secure facilities just like this, and the hope is that one day they'll be able to put the pieces back together again and reestablish control. But that's not really what the Prime Minister had to say to Harry. No, he hands the soldier a small piece of paper with a location on it and information about how to attain access. He tells Harry that should their hopes and aspirations fail, what he has in his hands is a last resort. Harry understands, and the two continue walking down the hall. The Prime Minister laughs to himself, and he chuckles that it was over before it started, wasn't it? The PM then quotes some Churchill before they reach the point of departure. Harry punches in the code that seals the Prime Minister in the bunker, and the 2 men shake hands and wish each other luck. There is a loud whirring sound as the fortified metal door begins to descend. Harry starts to walk away, but he turns around when the minister calls after him one last quote. He says that if they stand strong, the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But the last thing Harry sees before the door quickly seals shut is the crossed apparition of Dr. Chopra, who stands behind the minister with a slobbering smile on her face, eager to get her claws all over the man. Harry despondently walks through the facility, and he surprisingly encounters the still yet alive Major. Harry tells him to order his men to disable all the building's communication arrays, as he knows there will be no more legitimate commands coming out of here anymore. The Major promises to do so, and he starts to tell Harry that he saw what happened to the security team, but Harry cuts him off and says that he'll take care of it. So with a grim look on his face, Harry travels to their containment cell and he puts them out of their misery. He then slowly walks to the door of Patient Zero and quietly unlocks it. The door creaks as he pushes it open, and Harry surveys the darkened room. His eyes flicker over the defiled corpse of Alistair, and then they rest on the shadowed figure of Patient Zero, who has his back turned to him. And so, dear viewer, I will read to you the final words as they are written. "Think fast, Harry," he said, and started turning. But the Englishman's speed was such that he didn't even register the muzzle flash. And thus so concludes the story of the Thin Red Line. Wow, that was a pretty long and intense one. But what did you guys think of today's story? And what did you think of it as a means of exploring the origin of the crossed virus? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'm curious as to your all thoughts on this one. Oh, and by the way, if this happened to be your first cross video that you've seen, You should know that the adventures of Harry and his crew are actually continued from here in my video about the Fatal Englishman, so you can go watch that one next, I guess. But anyway, to completely move on to another point, apparently Garth Ennis had stated that there was actually supposed to be a third story featuring these characters. In a 2014 interview with Bloody Disgusting, he outright said that he had already completed writing a whopping 11-part story titled Once a Future King, which would effectively conclude the trilogy. I'm not sure what happened to it or why it never came out. Story-wise, I think it would have likely taken place in the days or months shortly after the events of the Thin Red Line. I kind of wonder if we would have seen that major guy there as well. I guess at the end of the day, though, it's a lost story, which is pretty sad. But putting all of that aside, as for my overall thoughts on today's story, well, there's a lot to unpack. I liked it for the most part. I did really enjoy the claustrophobic atmosphere and the general breakdown of, order. That kind of thing feels pretty raw and real to me, which we'll get into later. But that said, I think that the Thin Red Line was, unfortunately, probably ultimately weaker than, say, The Fatal Englishman for a few key reasons. Right. Firstly, I felt that the characterizations of the main four men was infinitely stronger in The Fatal Englishman. Their dynamic was one of the strongest parts of that arc. But here, Harry is pretty much the only one who gets any spotlight at all. Jock and Taff are pretty interchangeable and underdeveloped, with each only having a handful of lines, a small handful of lines. Another critique of the Thin Red Line would be perhaps its pacing. Frankly, it's a little bit rough, in my opinion. I did take the extended liberty of rearranging and combining scenes in the hopes of making it flow a tad bit better. Like, for instance, the air crew was originally briefly introduced in issue 1, but then they don't show back up again until issue 3, like they skip one. That's just like an example off the top of my head, but anyway. And a final thing I will say is that, well, this one is completely on me. It's not on anybody else. The thing I will say is that much of Ennis's targeted political satire and commentary in this story was kind of lost on me. Right, probably because I'm an American and because I was in elementary school when Gordon Brown was prime minister, but I don't really know who this guy is. Though now that I do think about it, I think it's more of a function of being from the U.S. mainly. I mean, after all, I don't really have any issues, understanding his Bush parodies when he includes those in The Boys. But in any event, changing gears again, let's see what Mr. Ennis had to say about his own work. Right. I'll pull from an interview he did with Comic Book Resources. The interviewer basically asks him what kind of shocking violence he has in store for the readers, and Ennis responds that the Thin Red Line tends more towards epic widescreen action for its set pieces. This is back in the beginning, when everything was falling apart in quite sudden and dramatic fashion, rather than the more focused, small-scale viciousness you tend to get in Crossed. You'll also see a lot left simply to description or implication, particularly in the case of our mystery man and his strange mental decay. Unsurprisingly, that is a pretty accurate description. I think that the Thin Red Line story was in many ways a kind of meditation on entropy. It's kind of fascinating and clinical to watch things unravel like this, to watch them collapse, from a detached perspective. Right. I think things within reality, not reality itself, especially human constructs, are prone to decay. And I think that if you push the right buttons, even the most respected and sophisticated individuals or institutions will utterly break. And obviously, we got that in this story. The government and social order collapsed. And more literally, with the cross themselves, man devolves into an uncivilized animal, regardless of who or what he once was. Yeah, anyway. Anyway, I think that's a good segue into talking about how this story handles the origin of the cross virus. Clearly, it was revealed to have had a supernatural basis. And while this thing is kind of interesting, personally, I much prefer a more grounded or realistic type explanation for things. A lot of horror, for me, lies in its plausibility, but that's just personal preference, I guess. But anyway, moving on. I think that about does it. We're probably going to take a break from crossed videos for a while, but do not worry, they'll be back. If you enjoyed today's video, though, please consider liking and subscribing. It would be very cool of you if you did, alright? But until next time, I will thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good one.